Most people think respect is something other people decide to give them. They believe if they become kinder, more helpful, more agreeable, or more talented, respect will naturally follow. But psychology tells a different story. Respect is rarely granted simply because you deserve it. It is granted because people perceive that you value yourself enough to protect your own worth. This is where many people unknowingly sabotage themselves. The world is constantly reading you. Every conversation, every decision, every reaction becomes information that people use to determine how they should treat you. They notice what you tolerate. They notice what you laugh off. They notice when you apologize unnecessarily, when you constantly seek approval, or when you abandon your own beliefs just to avoid conflict. These moments seem insignificant in isolation, but together they create a psychological profile in the minds of others. That profile becomes your reputation. The ancient Stoic philosopher Epictetus once suggested that no one can truly diminish you without your own participation. While circumstances can certainly be unfair, people often lose respect because they unconsciously teach others that their boundaries are flexible. They communicate, often without words, that preserving harmony matters more than preserving dignity. Human beings instinctively test limits. This is not always malicious. It is simply part of social psychology. Whether in friendships, workplaces, romantic relationships, or business, people are constantly observing where your limits exist. They want to know what you will accept, what you will challenge, and where you will compromise. If every test ends with you surrendering, people stop seeing your boundaries altogether. Over time, disrespect doesn't arrive as a dramatic event. It enters quietly, a joke at your expense. An interrupted sentence, a broken promise that you excuse, an invitation that always comes last, your opinion becoming optional. Each incident seems too small to confront, yet together they slowly redefine your position. This is why self-respect is not merely a feeling. It is a pattern of behavior. It is demonstrated through consistency, not declarations. Many people misunderstand confidence. They imagine confidence as speaking loudly, dominating conversations, or displaying superiority. But genuine confidence is surprisingly quiet. It doesn't need constant validation because it isn't built on the opinions of strangers. It comes from keeping promises to yourself. Think about that for a moment. Every time you tell yourself you will wake up early, but hit the snooze button instead, you send yourself a message. Every time you say you will exercise tomorrow, start that project next week, or finally speak up the next time someone crosses a line, but never do you weaken the relationship with yourself. Confidence is simply accumulated evidence. It is the evidence that when you make a decision, you follow through. When you establish a standard, you uphold it. When life becomes uncomfortable, you remain consistent instead of abandoning your principles. Your subconscious notices everything. It remembers every promise you kept and every promise you broke. This internal record becomes the foundation of your external presence. People often ask why some individuals command attention without saying much. They assume it is charisma, appearance, or status. Those things can help, but they rarely explain the entire picture. What people actually sense is certainty. A person who knows who they are moves differently. They don't rush to explain themselves. They don't desperately seek agreement. They don't change personalities depending on the audience. There is a psychological stability that others instinctively recognize. Humans are drawn towards certainty because certainty signals strength. Uncertainty invites negotiation. Notice how people who constantly apologize, even when unnecessary, gradually lose authority. Every excessive apology subtly communicates that they believe they are an inconvenience. Now compare that with someone who admits genuine mistakes but doesn't apologize for existing. Their words carry greater weight because they are used with intention. Self-respect Respect also requires accepting an uncomfortable truth. Not everyone has to like you. This idea frightens many people because our brains are wired for social acceptance. Thousands of years ago, rejection from the group could mean death. Today, that ancient programming still influences our behavior. We fear criticism. We fear disagreement. We fear disappointing people. So we compromise. We laugh at jokes that offend us. We agree with opinions we don't believe. We overextend ourselves to earn approval. Ironically, the more desperately someone seeks approval, the less they tend to receive genuine respect. Why? Because approval seeking communicates dependence. It tells people your emotional state depends on their opinion. And whenever your emotional stability depends entirely on someone else, you surrender a portion of your personal power. The paradox is fascinating. The moment you become comfortable with the possibility that some people will dislike you, you become far more authentic. And authenticity is difficult to manipulate. This doesn't mean becoming arrogant or emotionally cold. It means becoming internally anchored. Imagine a large oak tree during a storm. The wind bends its branches, but its roots remain firm beneath the ground. People with deep self-respect resemble those roots. Criticism may affect them. Failure may disappoint them. Conflict may challenge them, but none of these experiences determine their identity. Their identity comes from something deeper. From values, from discipline, from integrity. There is another misconception worth challenging. Many people think self-respect begins after success. After they become wealthy, after they receive recognition, after they gain status, but reality works in the opposite direction. Success often follows self-respect because people who value themselves naturally make better decisions. They leave unhealthy environments sooner. They refuse opportunities that compromise their principles. They invest in learning. They protect their time. They choose relationships that encourage growth instead of dependency. These choices compound over years. Eventually, what appears to outsiders as confidence is actually the visible result of thousands of invisible decisions. Small acts of discipline, small moments of courage, small boundaries consistently enforced, and this consistency creates something incredibly powerful. Predictability, not in the sense of being boring, but in the sense that your character becomes reliable. People know where you stand. They know your values cannot be purchased with compliments or shaken by criticism. That kind of reputation quietly commands respect long before you enter the room, because in the end, the greatest source of influence is not intimidation, popularity, or force. It is the quiet certainty that comes from knowing your own worth and refusing to negotiate it. Remember this, ***, the way you treat yourself is the lesson the world studies before deciding how it will treat you. ***, once you begin cultivating genuine self-respect, something interesting happens. You become more aware of the invisible lines that define your relationships. These lines are what psychologists call boundaries. They are not walls designed to keep people out. They are standards that determine how close people are allowed to come and under what conditions. Without boundaries, self-respect remains only an idea. It has no practical expression. Many people claim they value themselves, yet they repeatedly allow behavior that contradicts those words. They tolerate constant interruptions, broken promises, manipulation, and subtle forms of disrespect because confronting these situations feels uncomfortable. In doing so, they unknowingly teach others a dangerous lesson, that their limits are negotiable. Human behavior follows reinforcement. This is one of the oldest principles in psychology. Whatever behavior produces no meaningful consequence tends to repeat itself. If someone consistently arrives late and you quietly accommodate them every time, lateness becomes normal. If someone speaks to you disrespectfully and nothing changes afterward, that behavior becomes part of the relationship. Not necessarily because the person is cruel, but because the human mind naturally adapts to the standards it encounters. People learn from your responses more than your words. This is why boundaries are not established by making dramatic speeches. They are established through consistent action. Imagine someone who constantly says, "Please don't interrupt me." But every time they are interrupted, they simply stop talking and allow the conversation to move on. Their words communicate one message, but their behavior communicates another. People almost always believe behavior. Consistency is credibility. This is why emotionally mature individuals rarely argue about their boundaries. They simply enforce them. They understand that respect cannot be negotiated endlessly. At some point, it must be demonstrated through action. One of the greatest misunderstandings about boundaries is the belief that they make you unkind or difficult. In reality, the opposite is often true. Clear boundaries create healthier relationships because they remove uncertainty. People know what to expect from you. They know where the limits are. Healthy individuals usually appreciate this clarity because it builds trust. The people who become upset by boundaries often benefited from your lack of them. That distinction is worth remembering. There is an important psychological principle called reciprocity. Human beings tend to mirror the level of respect they receive. When you communicate calmly and directly, you invite others to do the same. When you respect your own time, people are more likely to respect it as well. Of course, there will always be exceptions. Some individuals ignore boundaries regardless of how clearly they are expressed. This is where consequences become necessary. Notice the word consequences, and not punishment, not revenge. Consequences, the difference matters. Punishment is driven by emotion. It seeks to hurt someone in return for hurting you. Consequences are driven by principle. They simply allow reality to unfold. If someone repeatedly lies to you, the consequence may be that you stop trusting them with important information. If someone constantly disrespects your time, the consequence may be that they no longer receive your availability. If someone repeatedly violates your values, the consequence may be distance. You are not trying to control them. You are deciding what kind of behavior earns access to your life. This distinction changes everything. Many people spend years trying to change difficult individuals, but psychology consistently demonstrates that lasting change rarely comes from pressure alone. People change when they experience the natural results of their choices. Sometimes your absence teaches more than your arguments ever could. There is another subtle mistake people make. They wait too long. They ignore small signs of disrespect because they fear appearing overly sensitive. They convince themselves that every incident is isolated, until suddenly they explode. The other person is shocked because, from their perspective, everything seemed acceptable yesterday. Boundaries work best when they are communicated early, calmly, and consistently. Small corrections prevent major conflicts. Think of a crack in a building's foundation. Repairing it immediately requires little effort. Ignoring it for years eventually threatens the entire structure. Relationships operate the same way. Addressing problems while they are still small protects both people involved. Another challenge is guilt. Many people feel guilty the moment they enforce a boundary. Why? Because they confuse kindness with self-sacrifice. They believe being a good person means always saying yes, always being available, always making everyone comfortable. But kindness without boundaries eventually becomes resentment. When you repeatedly ignore your own needs, frustration accumulates beneath the surface. Eventually, what began as generosity transforms into bitterness. Then people wonder why they suddenly feel emotionally exhausted. The exhaustion did not appear overnight. It was built one unnecessary compromise at a time. There is wisdom in understanding that every yes is also a no. Every time you say yes to someone else's unreasonable demand, you are saying no to your own time, your own energy, your own priorities, or your own peace of mind. Time is finite, attention is finite, emotional energy is finite. These are among the most valuable resources you possess. Protecting them is not selfish, it is responsible. History offers countless examples of influential leaders who understood this principle. They were not respected because they pleased everyone. They were respected because they stood for something larger than immediate approval. They accepted temporary discomfort in exchange for long-term credibility. This applies just as much to ordinary life. Whether you are speaking with family members, co-workers, friends, or strangers, every interaction quietly shapes your reputation. People begin asking themselves questions. Does this person mean what they say? Can their standards be trusted? Will they remain consistent under pressure? Over time, these questions receive answers, not from speeches. From repeated behavior, there is another paradox worth considering. The strongest boundaries are often the quietest. People who constantly announce how tough they are usually feel the need to convince others. Those who genuinely possess inner strength rarely advertise it. They simply act accordingly. When necessary, they leave. When appropriate, they say no. When values are compromised, they withdraw their participation. No drama, no theatrics, no endless attempts to prove themselves. There is remarkable power in emotional restraint. It forces people to confront the consequences of their own behavior rather than becoming distracted by your emotional reaction. Silence, when chosen intentionally, often communicates more than anger ever could. Over time, something fascinating begins to happen. People stop testing you as frequently, not because they fear confrontation, but because your consistency removes uncertainty. They understand that your standards are stable, that your words and actions align, that access to your attention, your trust, and your presence is earned rather than assumed. This is one of the deepest forms of personal authority. It does not depend on status. It does not require physical strength. It does not rely on intimidation. It is built through thousands of ordinary decisions made with extraordinary consistency. Every calm no, every honest conversation, every unhealthy situation you choose to leave instead of tolerate, every promise you keep to yourself, these moments shape how others perceive your value. Because in every relationship, people are constantly learning what your standards are, not from what you demand, but from what you refuse to accept. Remember this, ***, the boundaries you enforce today become the respect you receive tomorrow. ***, if self-respect is the foundation, and boundaries are the structure built upon it, then emotional control is the force that holds everything together under pressure. Anyone can appear confident when life is easy. Anyone can speak about discipline when nothing challenges them. But the true measure of personal strength is revealed in the moments when someone insults you, provokes you, underestimates you, or deliberately attempts to pull you into emotional chaos. Those moments are not interruptions to your character. They are the moments that reveal it. One of the greatest misconceptions about power is that it belongs to the loudest voice in the room. Modern culture often celebrates dramatic reactions, public confrontations, and emotional displays as signs of authenticity. But history, psychology, and philosophy consistently point in another direction. The individual who maintains control over themselves almost always possesses greater influence than the person who tries to control everyone else. This is because emotional stability is rare. Most people live reactively. They allow their environment to dictate their emotions. A compliment elevates them. An insult destroys their confidence. A stranger's opinion determines their mood for the rest of the day. They become, without realizing it, prisoners of external circumstances. When someone else can predict and manipulate your emotional reactions, they possess a form of power over you. The ancient Stoics understood this deeply. They argued that while we cannot always control events, we retain authority over our responses. This idea sounds simple, yet it is among the most difficult disciplines to practice. Why? Because our brains evolved to react before they learned to reason. When someone challenges your status or insults your identity, your nervous system interprets it as a threat. Your heart rate increases, your muscles tighten, your thoughts accelerate. In that moment, your instinct is not wisdom. It is survival. The problem is that many of the situations we face today are not life-threatening. They only feel that way. And when we respond to emotional discomfort as though it were physical danger, we often make decisions we later regret. Think about the arguments that damaged relationships, the impulsive message sent in anger, the sarcastic remark that could never be taken back, the emotional outburst that overshadowed years of credibility. Rarely do people regret the words they chose not to say. Far more often, they regret the words they could not control. This is why emotional discipline is not emotional suppression. These are entirely different ideas. Suppressing emotion means pretending you feel nothing. Discipline means acknowledging exactly what you feel without allowing those feelings to dictate your behavior. You recognize anger. You simply refuse to become anger. You notice fear. You simply refuse to let fear make your decisions. This distinction separates mature individuals from reactive ones. One of the most powerful psychological tools is the deliberate pause. Before responding to criticism, pause. Before defending yourself unnecessarily, pause. Before sending the message you wrote while frustrated, pause. That brief space between stimulus and response is where your freedom exists. Most people never discover it because they fill it immediately with impulse. Calmness should never be mistaken for weakness. In fact, calmness often creates uncertainty in the minds of those attempting to provoke you. Consider what happens when someone expects an emotional reaction but receives thoughtful silence instead. Their strategy loses effectiveness. Manipulation depends upon predictability. If someone knows exactly how to provoke you, they can guide your behavior without your awareness. But when your responses become measured rather than automatic, you become significantly more difficult to manipulate. This is one reason why emotionally composed people often appear mysterious, not because they are hiding anything, but because they refuse to reveal every passing emotion. They choose what deserves expression. That choice is power. There is another habit that quietly strengthens emotional authority: learning not to explain yourself excessively. Many people feel compelled to justify every decision they make. They say no, then spend 5 minutes apologizing for it. They establish a boundary, then immediately weaken it by seeking permission to enforce it. This often comes from a fear of disappointing others. Yet excessive explanation frequently communicates uncertainty. The more confident a decision becomes internally, the fewer words it usually requires externally. That does not mean becoming cold or dismissive. It means speaking with clarity rather than defensiveness. A simple answer delivered with calm conviction often carries greater weight than a lengthy argument filled with anxiety. People naturally trust certainty. Another overlooked aspect of emotional control is patience. We live in an age that rewards immediate gratification. Immediate replies, immediate success, immediate recognition, but meaningful influence rarely develops that quickly. Your reputation is not built in one conversation. Trust is not established in one interaction. Respect is not earned in one dramatic moment. These qualities accumulate slowly through repeated demonstrations of character. Patience allows you to think beyond the present emotion. It encourages you to ask a different question, not how do I win this argument, but who do I become through the way I handle this situation? That question changes everything. Because life is ultimately less about isolated victories and more about consistent identity, your character becomes your strategy. People remember patterns, they remember who remained composed during conflict, who spoke carefully under pressure, who remained fair even when treated unfairly. Over time, those memories create trust, and trust becomes influence. There is also tremendous strength in selective attention. Not every criticism deserves a response. Not every insult deserves acknowledgement. Not every disagreement deserves your energy. Some people provoke others simply to gain attention. Every emotional reaction feeds the cycle they seek. Choosing not to participate is sometimes the strongest response available. Silence is not surrender when it is intentional. Walking away is not weakness when it protects your peace. There is confidence in knowing that your value does not depend on winning every battle. In fact, highly effective people become remarkably selective about the battles they choose. They conserve emotional energy for what truly matters. This principle extends beyond conflict. It applies to ambition as well. Quiet confidence is not passive. It is deeply active beneath the surface. Instead of announcing every goal, quietly pursue it. Instead of arguing about your potential, develop your competence. Instead of demanding recognition, create results that become impossible to ignore. Achievement has a way of ending debates that words never can. People often underestimate those who remain quiet. They mistake silence for insecurity, patience for weakness, restraint for fear, yet history repeatedly reminds us that appearances can be deceiving. The strongest foundations are built underground, long before anyone admires the structure standing above them. Likewise, the most formidable individuals spend far more time developing themselves than advertising themselves. Their confidence comes from preparation, their composure comes from discipline, their influence comes from consistency. Eventually, people stop remembering the arguments they won. They remember something much more important: how they made others feel, whether they could be trusted, whether they remained grounded when everyone else became emotional, whether their actions consistently reflected their values. That is the quiet authority that cannot be manufactured. It cannot be purchased. It cannot be borrowed from status or appearance. It must be earned moment by moment, choice by choice. And perhaps this is the greatest paradox of all. The people who command the deepest respect are rarely obsessed with making others fear them. They are focused on mastering themselves because they understand a timeless truth. A person who cannot govern their own emotions will eventually be governed by someone else's intentions. So as you leave here today, remember this, asterisk, asterisk, the greatest power you will ever possess is not the ability to control others, it is the discipline to control yourself. Everything else begins there, asterisk, asterisk.